So, to continue just a little bit on this issue of mathematics and physics, and never to talk about it again. It gets. If I talk about it too much, I won't like it, and it's something I do like very much. But it's something I like thinking about, like philosophy of mathematics. And many people, one of my favorite philosophers is Martin Heidegger of Germany, and many people didn't realize it, but Dr. Heidegger had a much more scientific and but not reductivistic, but certainly naturalism is a component of Heidegger's philosophy. To the degree that naturalism is part of the German idealist tradition, and he appears to be one of the last of the German idealist traditions. These really heavy philosophers that started with Kant and ended with Hegel, apparently, but then, it was carried into the work of Heidegger, and it's the most important influence on his work because the young Heidegger, born in 1889, and about 1899, 1909, maybe about 1909, at about 20 years old, he was considering becoming a philosopher of mathematics. And so there's a dimension to Heidegger that doesn't really get revealed very often. His thought is more often thought to be some kind of mystical existentialism, which he went out of his way to try to deny. That there was a kind of radical objectivity in his philosophy, even if it was a radical objectivity of subjectivity, or a subjectivity of objectivity. He really went out of his way to kind of defend himself against that understanding of his philosophy. And I think that, the form of the world had a very important element in his thinking, and so he was always thinking like, is the human mind giving form to world, or is world giving form to the human mind, or what level of interaction is there between world and mind? How much of the world impinging upon my senses, like the sun when I go outside, or the moon, or the trees, or the forest, or a poem, how much of that is like making my mind what it is, and how much of my mind is actually kind of intending the world and giving the world shape and form and giving structure. But then Heidegger moves into more like social type philosophy of how we are in the world with others, and their conceptions of the world are part of what forms our conception of the world, and our conception is what forms their conception of the world, with this kind of radical question mark or exclamation point in existence that is like, I am here right now. I am doing this. I am doing this video on YouTube, or I'm eating this meal, or I'm sitting at a coffee shop with this girl and having, coffee, and she's having a lot of sugar in hers and a lot of cream, and I'm having mine black, or whatever it might be. So he kind of descended from this higher thinking about mind in the early 20th century and mathematics and the scientific cognition of the mind, which is very much true of the Marburg neo-Kantians, going all the way back to Kant's concerns with science, and then kind of like feeling like that the real roots of life are found in lived experience. And so you have this transition in the early Heidegger between the realm of, influenced by Marburg neo-Kantianism, and then his kind of movement toward more social philosophy, which then plunges him in the middle of a controversy in the 30s when he joins the Nazi Party, because he's looking for something that is more radically rooted, in tradition, in being in the world with others, from our birth toward our death. In the grip of making decisions existentially. But he radically wanted to kind of avoid his philosophy seeming like it was only about existence was this kind of radically empirical thing that couldn't be understood. So he moved in the direction of the form of all human existence being a kind of time-bound thinking that the human animal undertakes in thinking about itself, and in thinking with others, and in being a community, a Gemeinschaft, where the Germans would say a more radically socially bonded community. as opposed to a Gesellschaft. A Gesellschaft being more of a liberal society, loosely ordered, without any real social glue, if you will. So Gemeinschaft versus Gesellschaft. Strauss uses the term Bodenständigkeit, rootedness in the soil. These are all very German expressions of longing that they have for a more radical unity than they've had in the past, and that all people today kind of long for, because of how liberal philosophy has affected people's traditions of going back to, community life, agrarianism, all these kinds of issues. But the young Heidegger, he seemed to really captivate his students and really get involved in these issues in a way that no one could escape the importance of his thinking. But many renounce it today because they're so scared of it. They're so scared of his affiliation with the Nazis, and it's been overplayed, and people are tired of thinking of him as this great big fear figure. I know I got tired of that about 9 years ago, and I was like, I'm going to think through what this philosopher really said and what the meaning of what this philosopher said was, so I don't have to have that fear anymore. So my work at Northern Illinois University in philosophy began with taking a class with Larry Arnhart about Heidegger's politics and trying to get focused and clear about what the meaning of Heidegger's thought was. And what ended up being true is that Heidegger was a lot more thoughtful than a lot of other, and there's people that to this day that say, well, he was a Nazi, and he was a lot more thoughtful, and some people actually attribute more blame to him for that, because they're like, he's so thoughtful, how could he have fallen victim to something like National Socialism, But then if you were there in Weimar Germany and you saw the way the roots of community had been just uprooted, and liberal society was telling people that they didn't have any, it was complete Gesellschaft, there was no Gemeinschaft, and the Germans were like, man, we feel alienated. We feel like, this new Germany that's emerging in Weimar today, and that in the past had to do with Berlin. This is not what we feel. Strauss put it in, I think it was his autobiographical preface, where he said, that the feeling of the old Germany was stronger in Germany than the feeling of the new Germany. And the new Germany was this coming into being of kind of like nothing in the liberal regime, and there was an economic crisis, and the whole society was thrown into disarray. So it's hard to judge a person from the standpoint of today on the basis of what was emerging there, where you saw so many radical departures from what many good Germans thought were absurd things. That the Germans were not a united or communitarian people, and so one element, and not the most radical, and probably among the most right-thinking of National Socialism, was that it was a socialism of a form that was never achieved. And it was denied to it because of the brutality of Hitler's conception. He denied to Germany. He imposed war on the whole idea of socialism, and so then it made it into something that was radically antisocial, because he was so rapacious with the other nations that it turned Germany into just these warriors, when really the deeper conception even of Adolf Hitler himself was to unify the society and to bring a greater unity to the Germans, but it derailed badly, and so Heidegger got caught up in that controversy, and his philosophy has ended up, I think, in some ways being hijacked by that, rather than by being seen for what it was. Was an attempt to reach out and really get to the roots of being and the meaning of being. And it was an attempt not for being not to be something that's grounded completely in the human and in the will of the human either. But he wanted to restore to subjectivity the powers of art, and to the power of art and poetic art, the formation of peoples and the formation of the mind of a people and of a nation, and all these things that are really, nobody would deny that they're important things today, but when you put the colors of the red and the black on them, on him, and you see him that way, his philosophy becomes too frightening to people, and so they shouldn't be frightened of Heidegger, because he lived in a time that was antagonistic, and that made him a bit more, it gave his philosophy a more bellicose formation and formulation than I think it otherwise would have had. But I pointed people to Strauss and to the Riesler eulogy because there Strauss gets at something of what he thought of Heidegger's politics that may be as contrasted to his own. That's a very subtle thing and a very deep thing.